When we think about the World Cup, we usually think about the very best of football. Last-minute goals. Moments that send an entire nation into celebration. Stadiums glowing under the lights while billions of people around the world focus on a single ball. The World Cup has always been seen as the greatest celebration of the world's most popular sport. And the 2026 World Cup was expected to be bigger than anything that came before it. 48 national teams. 3 host countries. 104 matches. The largest World Cup in history. But there is something that has been making many people within the football world increasingly uneasy. Because almost as soon as the tournament began, the controversies began as well. Not from one place, but from multiple directions at the same time. A lawsuit in the United States. An investigation involving World Cup ticket sales. Complaints from national football federations. Warnings about player welfare. And growing questions about how FIFA is managing this tournament. At first glance, none of these stories seem connected. Separate incidents. Separate controversies. Separate problems. But what if they are actually pieces of the same puzzle? What if behind the most ambitious World Cup ever organized, there are pressures and tensions that most fans have never been able to see? Before we continue, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe the controversies surrounding the 2026 World Cup are simply inevitable for an event of this size? Or do they point to something much bigger? Because the first story we are about to explore begins with a mural in Dallas. But ultimately, it leads us to a much larger question about FIFA itself and the future of modern football. That story begins in Dallas, Texas, one of the most important host cities of the 2026 World Cup. A city scheduled to host 9 matches, more than any other city in the tournament. For nearly 3 decades, there was a familiar sight in downtown Dallas. A massive mural featuring whales. It was more than just a piece of public art. It was part of the city's memory, part of an identity that generations of Dallas residents had grown up with. But then, in May of this year, things began to change. Workers arrived. Fresh layers of paint slowly started covering the mural. Day by day, the whales disappeared. And the most controversial part was that the artist who created the mural was never informed. No phone call, no email, no explanation. He only learned what had happened after most of the artwork had already been painted over. The reaction was almost immediate. Residents launched petitions. Debates erupted across social media. And eventually, the artist decided to take legal action. He filed a lawsuit seeking at least $25 million in damages, arguing that a cultural landmark had been destroyed in the name of the World Cup. What makes this story particularly interesting is that no one was protesting Dallas hosting the World Cup. No one was protesting football. What many people struggled to accept was the feeling that a major decision had been made without the local community having any meaningful voice in the process. And that is where the story becomes far more interesting. Because as soon as the controversy exploded, FIFA quickly stated that it had no involvement. According to FIFA, this was a local matter, a decision made by the host committee. But that response immediately created another question. If a city changes itself to accommodate the World Cup, if tournament requirements contribute to controversial decisions, then who is ultimately responsible when things go wrong? As it turns out, Dallas was not the only place where that question was being asked. Just days later, another controversy began to emerge. This time, it had nothing to do with art. It involved something that millions of fans care about even more: World Cup tickets. If the story in Dallas raised questions about responsibility, what happened with the ticketing system touched on something even more sensitive: money. Because in the end, most people do not come to the World Cup as lawyers, politicians, or football executives. They come as fans. And the very first thing they have to face is the cost. For months, social media has been flooded with posts from supporters complaining about the expense of attending the 2026 World Cup. Not just match tickets, but hotels, flights, travel between host cities, and especially the confusing fluctuations in ticket prices. Then, things became more serious. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey launched a formal investigation into World Cup ticket sales. Investigators wanted to know whether fans were truly participating in a transparent marketplace, or whether there were mechanisms operating behind the scenes that the public could not see. Some allegations claimed that seat maps were changed after tickets had already been sold. Others questioned the use of dynamic pricing systems, where ticket prices could rise dramatically as demand increased. And there were also concerns that the perception of ticket scarcity may have been intentionally created. At this stage, no final conclusions have been reached. But the most important detail is not the outcome of the investigation. It is the fact that the investigation exists at all. Because unlike the controversy in Dallas, FIFA cannot simply describe this as a local issue. Ticketing is a central part of the tournament's commercial operation, and when questions begin to emerge there, the pressure starts moving much closer to the center of FIFA's power. But even that may not be what concerns FIFA the most. Because just as the debate over ticket prices was gaining momentum, another group began to speak out. Not politicians, not lawyers, but the very people who have followed the World Cup for decades, the fans themselves. And that may be the most uncomfortable challenge for FIFA of all, because investigations eventually reach conclusions. Lawsuits eventually make their way through the courts. But when fans begin to lose trust, that becomes a completely different story. In recent weeks, fan organizations across Europe have increasingly spoken out about the 2026 World Cup. They are not talking about tactics. They are not talking about referees. And they are not talking about match results. They are talking about ticket prices. According to these organizations, the cost of attending the World Cup has risen to a point where many ordinary supporters can no longer realistically afford it, and that is what concerns them most. Because the World Cup was built on the passion of football fans, not on premium hospitality packages, not on exclusive VIP sections, not on luxury experiences available only to a small group of people. For many supporters, the World Cup has always represented something special. A place where an ordinary working person could save money for years and eventually experience the dream of watching their national team play on football's biggest stage. But many feel that reality is beginning to change. Fan groups argue that the tournament is becoming increasingly expensive, increasingly exclusive, and increasingly disconnected from the very people who helped create the atmosphere that made the World Cup unique for generations. Facing growing pressure, FIFA released a limited number of discounted tickets for each match. On the surface, it appeared to be a positive step, but many supporter organizations argue that it does not address the core issue. In their view, the real question is not how many discounted tickets are available. The real question is who the World Cup is being designed for. The fans, or the revenue? That is a dangerous question for any sporting organization, because once supporters begin to feel that they are no longer at the center of the tournament, every future decision is viewed through a different lens. Suspicion grows faster, frustration spreads further, and what makes this even more significant is that these concerns are no longer coming only from fans. One of the world's biggest football powers has also begun publicly expressing its dissatisfaction. That country is France. And then came France. What makes this situation particularly interesting is that there was no lawsuit, no investigation, no legal battle. Just a simple question: is the 2026 World Cup becoming too large to operate efficiently? The French Football Federation formally expressed concerns about the team's travel schedule throughout the tournament. The reason was straightforward. The distances between host cities are enormous. The travel requirements are increasingly complex. And all of that places additional strain on both the players and the coaching staff. At first glance, this may seem like nothing more than a logistical issue. But remember who is raising the concern. This is France. One of the favorites to win the tournament, one of the most successful football nations in the world, and one of the strongest teams on the planet. When a federation of that stature feels compelled to speak up, it suggests that concerns surrounding the 2026 World Cup are no longer coming only from the outside. They are beginning to emerge from within football's elite circles as well. And the story coming out of France leads directly to an even bigger issue. Because if national teams are beginning to worry about travel demands, scheduling challenges, and increasing physical workloads, then the next question becomes unavoidable. How much will the players have to sacrifice for the biggest World Cup in history? That question has become increasingly important because the 2026 tournament is unlike anything football has ever seen before. 48 teams, 104 matches, 3 host nations, thousands of miles of travel, and a competition that stretches across a vast geographic area. For fans, that expansion may sound exciting. More teams, more matches, more stories, more football. But for the players, it can mean something very different. More flights, more recovery challenges, more physical strain, and less time for the body to recover between moments of maximum intensity. Many of the world's top players arrive at the World Cup immediately after completing long club seasons. Some have already played close to 60 matches before the tournament even begins. Now they are being asked to compete in the largest World Cup ever created. That is why sports scientists, player welfare advocates, and medical professionals have repeatedly raised concerns in the lead-up to the tournament. Not because they oppose the World Cup, but because they worry that football's calendar is expanding faster than the human body can realistically handle. And once that conversation begins, it becomes difficult to stop. Because every additional match, every additional flight, every additional commercial commitment eventually raises the same question. At what point does growth come at the expense of the people actually playing the game? And as it turns out, concerns about fairness, responsibility, and trust were not limited to Europe. Another major dispute was already unfolding thousands of miles away. This time, in Africa. Those concerns had been building long before the 2026 World Cup even began. Because this is not a normal World Cup. The tournament has expanded from 32 teams to 48. The number of matches has increased to 104. The competition lasts longer, and the travel requirements now stretch across 3 different countries. On paper, it sounds spectacular, bigger, more ambitious, more global than ever before. But for the players, it means something else. More matches, more flights, and less recovery time. Just imagine it. A player has just completed a club season that lasted nearly 10 months. 50 matches, 60 matches, sometimes even more. Then, instead of resting, they immediately step into the biggest tournament on the planet, with the highest pressure, the highest intensity, and the most demanding schedule in World Cup history. For months, sports scientists and player representative organizations have been warning about the risks of overload. Their concern is simple. Modern football is moving dangerously close to the limits of what the human body can handle, and the 2026 World Cup may become the ultimate test of those limits. What makes this especially important is that the debate is no longer about tactics. It is no longer about formations. And it is no longer about football strategy. It is about the people who make the game possible, the athletes who billions of fans pay to watch, the players that FIFA, domestic leagues, broadcasters, and sponsors all depend on, because without them, there is no World Cup. And when even player health becomes a source of controversy, another question begins to emerge. Are the pressures surrounding the 2026 World Cup really just isolated incidents? Or are they pointing toward a much larger issue in the way modern football is being managed? That question became even more significant when another dispute surfaced. This time, not in Europe, but in Africa. And it involved something fundamental. Who actually has the right to play in the World Cup? And then came Africa, where another dispute emerged just before the World Cup. This time, the story revolved around a very simple question. Who truly deserves a place at the tournament? The Nigerian Football Federation filed an official complaint with FIFA. They argued that several players representing the Democratic Republic of Congo were not eligible to compete during the World Cup qualifying campaign. Cameroon raised similar concerns. That quickly turned the case into one of the most significant controversies of the qualification process. FIFA launched an investigation. But the final outcome did not satisfy everyone. The Democratic Republic of Congo was allowed to continue competing and eventually secured its place at the World Cup. Meanwhile, Nigeria was left on the outside looking in. For many Nigerian supporters, the issue was not simply the result itself. It was how that result had been reached. Questions were raised about transparency, about consistency, and about the way FIFA handles disputes that can directly affect the fate of an entire national team. But this is where the story becomes truly interesting. Dallas, World Cup tickets, European fan organizations. The French national team, player welfare, Nigeria. At first glance, none of these stories seem connected. They happened in different places. They involved different people, and they emerged from completely different circumstances. But look a little closer, and a pattern begins to emerge. Each controversy, in its own way, is connected to the same underlying question: who benefits from the decisions being made? And who bears the consequences when those decisions create problems? Whether it is a local community losing a cultural landmark, fans struggling to afford tickets, players facing heavier workloads, or national federations challenging FIFA's rulings, the same tension keeps appearing. A growing gap between the people making the decisions and the people most affected by them. That does not automatically mean FIFA is wrong, and it does not mean every criticism is justified. But it does explain why so many different groups, from so many different parts of the football world, are suddenly asking similar questions at the same time. And when that happens, it becomes difficult to dismiss each controversy as an isolated incident, because what begins to emerge is not a collection of separate stories, but a much larger conversation. A conversation about trust, about accountability, and about the future direction of the world's most popular sport. And that may be the most important story surrounding the 2026 World Cup. And that is when the bigger picture finally begins to come into focus. Take a step back and look at everything that has happened. An artist in Dallas believes the local community was never given a voice. Fans are questioning ticket prices. Supporter organizations worry that the World Cup is drifting away from ordinary football lovers. The French Football Federation is concerned about scheduling and travel demands. Players face growing risks of overload and fatigue. Nigeria has challenged the way FIFA handled a major eligibility dispute. At first glance, these seem like completely separate stories, but they all share one thing in common. In every case, there are people who feel that important decisions are being made far away from them, and they are the ones who must live with the consequences. That is the paradox of modern football. The sport has never been bigger than it is today. The World Cup has never generated more money than it does today, and FIFA has never possessed greater global influence than it does today. Yet at the same time, there have never been so many different groups questioning the system all at once. Fans want to be heard. Players want to be protected. National federations want a stronger voice. Local communities want to be respected. And when all of those groups begin speaking up at the same time, the conversation stops being about a ticket, a mural, or a qualifying match. It becomes something much bigger. Who is modern football really serving? The fans? The players? The nations? Or the commercial system operating behind it all? And perhaps that is the real debate surrounding the 2026 World Cup. Because in just a few weeks, the tournament itself will come to an end. One nation will lift the trophy. The greatest goals will be replayed thousands of times. Historic moments will be remembered for generations. And like every World Cup before it, most people will remember what happened on the pitch. But years from now, when people look back on this tournament, they may remember something else as well. Not a match. Not a goal. But the questions that were asked. Questions about ticket prices. Questions about player welfare. Questions about the role of fans. Questions about the relationship between FIFA and the people affected by its decisions. That does not mean FIFA is failing. And it does not mean every criticism is correct. But it does reveal an important reality. More and more people feel the need to question the most powerful organization in world football. And that is something no institution can ignore forever. Perhaps these controversies will eventually fade away. The lawsuits will end. The investigations will conclude. And the World Cup will move on. But the questions being asked today will not disappear so easily. Because they are about the future of football itself. They are about who truly comes first in the world's most popular sport. And perhaps that will become the most lasting legacy of the 2026 World Cup. Before you go, I would love to hear your opinion. Do you believe the controversies surrounding the 2026 World Cup are simply isolated issues that come with hosting an event of this scale? Or do you think they are signs that FIFA will eventually be forced to change? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth football analysis like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. And, as always, the story of football is far from over,